feature becomes an entire program, and the entire program takes on new properties, new characteristics, new issues, new ways of being, and developed and evolved into the Africa Forum. So we go where it takes us. So it's a deed-poll situation. All right. So it's been 25 years of running African, 25 years of the Africa Forum. And as we go through all the way to August, every once in a while we'll replay some of those conversations, replay some of those interviews, and rememory some of the commitments, the ideas, the issues over those 25 years. We ask you also to participate, reminding us and reminding ourselves. And that is why the focus of this program for the year all the way to August 1 is looking back, facing forward. And you know, Sankofa has been a theme, one of the pillars of this program from the very beginning. Go back and fetch it. For this year, though, we'll literally be doing that, going back to fetch it, because there is no disgrace or dishonor in going back to the past to retrieve that which we have lost. And understanding, though, that not everything from the past is good for us. And so we understand that categorically. When we talk about going back to fetch it, we're talking about going back to find ourselves. Where did we lose our confidence? Where did we lose our names? Where did we lose our intelligence? Where did we lose ourselves as Africans, our identities? Where did we lose our ancestors? Professor Obati Shaka talks about the integration trap and the generation gap. How did this happen? And how come we're now behaving like serpents eating our own tails, or dogs chasing after our tails? That's a never-ending effort in futility. So going back to fetch it is important to moving forward. Checking the rearview mirror is important, and this is what we're doing. Looking back, facing forward. I know many scholars, many Pan-Africanists, and we have heard them. We have sat in a lot of the conferences and fora in which this idea of Sankofa is scoffed at, because many scholars believe that we are trapped in looking back and we need to get over it. But there's one thing I have to say about getting over it, even as we go back to fetch it, is that we won't get over it until we have figured out what really happened, and until we've figured out a way to prevent it from happening again. As it is now, we have not yet figured out a way. Even if we had an idea of what happened, we don't seem to be, it seems to me as if we haven't grasped the idea of why it happened and how it happened, and what were the factors that led to the displacement of an entire race of people. To the extent that there's an entire race of people who have forgotten their gods, who have forgotten their names, who have forgotten their home, who do not know who they are. To the extent that we have forgotten that, and to the extent that we continue to worship the enslavers, the only set of people on the face of the earth who worship the gods of their enslavers, who pay deference to those who oppress and continue to oppress us are the African people. And that is why looking back, even while we face forward, is so important. Go back and fetch it. And that's the theme of the program for the entire year. 25 years of running African, 25 years of IRIA FM. We celebrate that. Looking back, facing forward, even while we remind ourselves that excellence is the highest form of rebellion. Even while for those who have been facing forward, even while we're Sankofa-ing and refuse to trade off our identity, to trade off any parts of our identity, our African identity or our intellectual identity in order to fit in. That we continue to refuse to pass someone else's test in order to determine whether or not we are capable. That even while we understand the extent of a psychic trauma and the psychic violence and the extent to which psychic violence is a part of our everyday reality, for those of us who stand up and say that even though we're born in a state of decay and our children are being born into a state of decay, their inheritance doesn't have to be garbage because we're changing it at this point. Understanding what happened, how it happened, and understanding that we need to prevent this from happening again, but also understanding that our heritage, our history, our culture is important to facilitating that understanding. So we honor our moral obligation to remember, looking back, facing forward. Sankofa, go back and fetch it. Once again, good morning to you.
What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! When do we want it? Now!
Speak truth to the people. To identify the enemy is to free the mind. Free the mind of the people. Speak to the mind of the people. Speak truth.
We'll be looking back and even while we face forward. So we'll be rebroadcasting some of the very early interviews, some of the later ones, and some of the very, very late ones that we have done over the years. Also, reaching out back to some of the guests over the years and members of the Running African family throughout the space, even while we dissect and discuss once more. But I think, and we've been saying this, that we have talked a lot. 25 years when we just started at IRIA FM, because we were predominantly a music station. We weren't allowed to conduct interviews that were longer than 5 minutes, and in some cases shorter, believe me. So that when we started back in the day in 1990, the interviews that I conducted, and I remember my first interviews first three interviews, Eileen Thomas and Clara Reese. My first two interviews, Eileen Thomas, Clara Reese, and Professor Rex Nettleford was a little bit later on. But yeah, my first three interviews, these were they. And the questions, we were talking to Clara Reese, she was from South Africa, and the questions we were asking is, what do you eat? You know, what kind of music do you listen to? These were some of the stuff we were talking about. And I remember the first time we mentioned the word ancestor on this program, what happened and how long it took before the population, the nation, he says, space-time consortium. What happened 10,000 years ago and 10 minutes ago occupy the same space and time in consciousness. That is why we look back. We look back because what happened 10,000 years ago and 10 minutes ago occupy the same space and time in our consciousness.
Possessive influence of the European implanted spirit, and know that they have little or no knowledge of African history, and therefore little or no knowledge of their own history as a person and an individual. So there's a consistency between the consciousness and the history that a person has and the memory that an individual has. They frequently, for example, personalities differ in handwriting, artistic talent, or even in knowledge of foreign languages. Speak a different language, depending on the personality that's in there. Multiple personalities typically develop in people who were severely and repeatedly abused as children, apparently as a means to protect themselves against the pain of abuse. Does that strike another note in you? Often only one or two of the subpersonalities would be conscious of the abuse, while the others would have no memory or experience of the pain. To a great extent, the personality of the African American today has been shaped by our desires to escape the memory of the slave experience, to deny its existence. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to come in terms with it. We don't want to re-experience it psychologically. We don't want to know about it. And therefore our lives becomes defined by eternal escape and avoidance of reality and of history and of a knowledge of who we are and how we came to be who and what we are. And consequently, we cannot act upon the reality of our history, and we guide our behavior and define ourselves in terms of a fantasy as history and a misinterpretation of reality. This is what it is. Yes. How did we get this religion we talked about earlier? I talked about Star Trek, and we talked about the time warp that Star Trek depicts quite frequently, of how people move from one state of consciousness and one world and are suddenly flipped into a new world. They go through a warp, and suddenly, all of a sudden, everything that they used to use to guide themselves no longer counts. The language that they used to speak can no longer be understood in the new world. The values that they used to guide their behavior are no longer workable. In fact, it gets them into trouble. The gods, the culture, the nature of the social relations, and all of the things that they used prior to meeting the warp no longer suffice. Now they must learn new values and new behaviors and new orientations in order to adapt themselves to the new universe that they live in. We are in that kind of position today. Think about the African in the world the African lived in prior to being brought across the oceans. Think about the gods we praised. Think about the organization of our society. Think about the languages that we spoke, the food that we ate, the dress that we wore, the music, the song, the dance, and all of those things that defined us as African people. And think how horrendous it must have been for us to be thrown into this world where there was a whole new language, a whole new social hierarchy, a whole new set of authorities, people pushing you around who you don't understand, people who are putting strange tools in your hands, people who are trying to get you to relate to them and to relate to each other in a very different kind of way from what you're used to relating to. Think about the stress and the confusion, and think about the abuse.
All right.
Think about the horror of that situation our parents and great-grandparents were put in. And there was somebody that said then, if you pray to this God, if you talk this way, if you dress this way, if you relate this way, you'll get a greater sense of security. Your anxiety will be reduced. You will feel good. And you'll be able to withstand the pain of your existence. And the God then that I'm going to hand you is one that I have created for you. And a theology that comes with it is one that I have created so that you will continue to serve me as you continue to serve it. And we come to believe in the veracity of that God and that religion. Why? Because we feel so secure when we follow it. And we feel so relieved when we follow it. And yet we wonder why, despite all of our prayers, despite all of our devotion, we still suffer the way we do. I often ask the question, why is it that the people who pray the most have the most of their children in the jails of America today? Who shout and kick over the benches and so forth, are filling up the prisons and have the children killing each other and addicted out here in these streets. There must be a problem here, ladies and gentlemen. We must reorient ourselves to our religion. We must reorient ourselves to our gods, because apparently we don't have the appropriate orientation. Because as that book you read says, you can tell a tree by what? The fruit it bears. And therefore, if it bears bitter fruit, or if it bears no fruit at all, the God you worship says it is but fit to be hewn down and thrown into the flame and consumed. Read your own Bible. It gives you a very practical measure as to whether the religion you're pursuing is an appropriate one. And that measure says, look at the fruit that it bears. And if then the kind of religion and the God you're pursuing ends up having your sons in the jails of America and ends up maintaining African people in slavery and servitude in their own lands and everywhere, then something is wrong in terms of how we relate to that religion and that God, because the outcome is wrong and the outcome is destructive. And it's because we don't want to confront the abuse that we went through and deal with. You see, when you go through that time warp, the only way you can ultimately come to understand the new world is to understand what happened when you went through that warp. That transformed what? The personality. That made the personality what it was. And I find that interesting when further over, when I read here of what happens when the personality moves from one personality to another, when the body is possessed by one personality and that personality is displaced and another one comes in. It says during the switch there is typically a period of seconds or even minutes when heart rate, breath rate, and other physiological markers show a disorganization that is followed by a new pattern typical of the personality that is emerging. In other words, then, we go through a period of disorganization and stress, and then the personality is reorganized to fit into the new circumstances.
And it's now after 7 o'clock. You're inside of the Africa Forum, Running Africa, and seeking truth, learning from the past, absorbing the spirit of human possibility, honoring our moral obligation to remember. Sankofa, go back and fetch it.
When we lose our African connection, we lose our royal connection. When we disconnect ourselves from Africa, we cease to be a world people. Without the African connection, we are a disjointed people, begging for...
In the meantime, we're asking a slightly difficult question. We know that it's not such an easy one, but you answer correctly. You get a copy of Jamaica and the Debate Over Reparation for Slavery, a discussion paper prepared by the Jamaica National Bicentenary Committee, Farine Shepherd, Ahmed Reed, Cavell Francis, and Kamika Murphy. Answer this question correctly, and you get a copy of the book. What was the very first name of this program? What did I call it before I called it Running African? All right. What was the very first name of this program? All right. So we'll take the answer even while you call with your comments on the idea of Sankofa and what Sankofa means to you. So go right ahead, Jody. We're opening the phone lines. 974-5079. 974-5051. 974-5043. And 1-888-991-4152. As we go to the telephone lines, good morning.
Good. Hotep, Kabu.
Hotep, how you doing?
Good.
Give thanks, my brother.
Why, you bowl me right away. And you know, me did listen to the program.
Got it. I know that is not an easy one, right? I know that is not an easy one, because it's not even as if we've repeated it over the years. It's that it was there for a little while, and then, Running African was a feature within the program. But Running African ultimately became the name of the program. But what was the name of the program before?
Right. I never think about it.
Yeah.
But more some Kofa back to the old thing of the Ma'at,
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very, very important thing. Yeah, they have a youth couple months ago. He's a Jamaican, but he study Egyptology, and I think his name Sinclair. I'm not sure.
That I had on this program?
Yeah, man. Couple time him come on and him teach mathematics and...
Oh, okay. Yes. And interesting you should mention him. But you guys are Sinclair now, but me totally forget his name, and it's not right, All right, I'll tell you in a little while.
Because I tell you why. Over the... Well, couple time, me and some family, them are discuss something. And me I show them how Moses was a general. Because Moses grew up in a Pharaoh house. And after them left, Moses say him gone up the hill, go and talk to God. And come back down with 10 of the 40 negative confessions of the man.
But if you see, I see where you're going on it, but then I want to, because with Sankofa Ing,
yeah.
That is if you see the story of the Exodus as a literal story that actually happened, then you can give all these characteristics to somebody called Moses. Because remember, we're talking about Moses. We're talking about Moses, because Moses itself is part of a name, Moses. As a matter of fact, that's the end of many names in Egypt. Yeah. And then if you believe that the story of the Exodus, because there is no documented proof, no historical documented proof of that story of the Exodus.
Yeah.
So, and that is why, 10 of the negative confessions came back to us on a tablet.
Yeah.
You see where I'm going?
Yeah. So you see how long tablet they about.
Yes, and then we must talk about Akhenaten. We can't, when we talk about the Exodus and talk about, the one God and the concept of the one God, then we still have to talk about Akhenaten. When we talk about the Psalms of David, we also must talk about Akhenaten, because that is why we have to go back and fetch it. Because that which we did and which we have done has been repackaged and rebranded and sold to us, and we now worship it as belonging to somebody else.
Funny you should say that, because up to yesterday, may I tell my people them say, the people them who are the church them where we in and now come out as some people who did have a God for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, January, February, March, and is Akhenaten come up with the concept of one God. Then them come hijack it now and it back to we.
Yes, and it's important for Christians to go back to fetch it also, go back to the first council of Nicaea, to fetch it, to fetch that which they themselves have lost.
Yes.
It is very important. We can't ignore the councils and especially the first council of Nicaea and Constantine. What if a story there's up? But Garnet, you know, try the question.
No, go away and come back. Go away and come back.
All right, go away and come back. Yeah, man.
Good morning.
Yes, what's up, my brother?
Yeah, Happy New Year.
Same to you, Happy New Year. Yes.
I tell you, I've never met been a cage of Prince time, but a long time I don't hear her voice.
Yes, we'll do.
Alright, the person who gonna talk so a while ago is Patton Duncan.
True, yes.
And I'm one of the persons who want to hear him this year because I want to hear him discussing Cartesian mathematics along with including geometry.
It's interesting you said that, because this is one of the things that we were supposed to be talking about in this space this morning, and my husband and myself was talking about it just as I was leaving the house this morning with the Cartagenians, and I said, you know what, let's just leave that for a little while, because then we just don't want to jump in at the middle without first explaining Carthage and the Cartagenians and so on, and here you are now bringing that same thing to the space. So brilliant. Thank you so much.
And there's an ex lady that when you had a broadcast in what do you call it now? You had a broadcast with Prime Eye from Africa.
Yes.
There was a lady on one of them.
She was actually in the studio in Ghana?
No, yeah, in Ghana. She knows something about it.
That's
so
true, yes.
You could invite her.
I recall that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And the other thing is, I would like you to interview Dr. Seeley this year.
All right. You know what?
One more thing.
Look here. You're not just saying Dr. Sebi. Wait. Because you know that I've been trying to get Dr. Sebi, but I'm not getting Dr. Sebi. So anybody who have Dr. Sebi number, please give me, please. Yes, go ahead.
The last time that I saw you or saw your husband, I've been at the Marcus Garvey celebration. I've been trying to call him ever since, and I'm not getting through.
Really?
And I promised to give him something. I always get on voicemail.
Okay, I don't know. Leave your name and number then. Make sure you leave your number. I can't talk for him. I can't talk for him.
Right. No problem.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right.
You know, Swiss Chris, at Swiss Chris on Twitter. No, you're saying, come on, I don't even remember, but can I please have a copy? I am on the island. So you're on the island and want a copy. Don't work like that, because you of all persons should know, right? So that's why you're not getting a copy until you remember, right? You of all persons. Ansel Palmer at Ansel Palmer. Hey, my brother, how you doing? Says Queen Mother, you have been a beacon over the years, illuminating the path for I give thanks. Selector Princess, good morning to you. And Ricardo Russell, love your sister. I've been with you from a boy. Yeah, Ricardo, you just put me sound away. Now I'm conscious man. Thanks for educating Jamaica. You know, on the text, well, when you're texting the name of the program, please put your names. Your telephone number is there, but please put your name. FB says Sunday Sunshine was the first name of the program. No, but Sunday wasn't it. I did not. Sunday Sunshine. Sunday Sunshine is a program that comes after, which is Big A's program, and it has been Sunday Sunshine from that time till now time. All right, taking your telephone calls at 13 minutes after 7 o'clock. Sankofa Ing, your own ideas on Sankofa, your own ideas on looking back, facing forward, and whether or not we should even look back or just go forward. Is it possible to go forward without looking back? As we go back to the phone lines, Hotep?
Hello, good morning.
Hi, Hotep, my sister, how are you? Welcome to the space.
Happy New Year, Andrea, and I wish you all the best of health.
Thank you.
I sure do hope you amass a lot of wealth.
Oh, thank you so much, and same to you.
I was calling to tell you that it was Patton Duncan, but somebody forced me.
Yes, Dr. Patton Duncan. That is true. Thank you so much.
Andrea, you know, you just met me I think about something. You know that all my life I always say when I have a son, I must name him Moses. And I did. I have one son, and I did name him Moses. And when I you say something about Moses, and honestly, I'm sorry, so I name him Moses.
No, but don't be sorry because if you understand Moses and can and then explain that to your son, then I'm sure that he'll understand who is named after and the job he has to do, which it's one of the ancient kings of Egypt, one of the ancient pharaohs. So it's okay to do that, but really and truly, for our own knowledge, Moses is part of a name. The full name would be something like Tutmoses. Because it was Egyptian. So it is part of a name, but understanding who those ancient kings were, I think is pretty important. Yeah.
Boy, Andrea, I just started call it like about 6-7 years ago, and I really do thank you, and I bless you, and I bless your family, and I bless the whole African family.
Thank you so much, my sister. Thank you so much, and blessings to you too. Do we look back? Why is it necessary to look back? Looking back, facing forward.
Good morning.
Hi, Hotep, my brother.
Good morning, Andrew.
Yes, Hotep, greetings. Good morning.
Greetings.
Yes.
Shalom. Well, I'm here to introduce myself to you.
Yes.
I'm one of the Moses family that you just speak of.
Yes.
One of the ancient history, Jewish people. Well, there's something I want to talk about. You're saying Moses was an Egyptian. I want to correct you on that. He was not.
You want to correct me on what? I don't know if anybody called Moses. So I'm not talking.
Moses.
No, I didn't say Moses was an Egyptian.
Oh, you said he wasn't one of the Haitian king of Pharaoh.
No, I say if you understand the concept and the idea of Moses, because the idea is that Moses is part of a name.
Right.
Right. So Moses is where Moses is. I mean, if you wanted to say to me that Moses was real and that the story of Exodus is real and that that you're okay, you're fine to do that. So go ahead and do that. But
right,
I do not acknowledge Moses as a real person. Moses was real and that the story of Exodus is real and that that you're okay, you're fine to do that. So go ahead and do that. But
right,
I do not acknowledge Moses as a real person. But go ahead.
Okay. Many people confuse about the Old Testament part of the Bible because there's never one yet from that generation.
Yeah, but I'm not confused about the Bible at all.
No,
Old Testament or New Testament, yes.
I'm not saying you, but many people confuse about it. They think those part of the Bible probably like a fairy tale or maybe illusion.
No.
But it is real.
No, there are stories. You see, the thing is that you have to listen closely because I know you want to refute something. But
I'm
yes.
saying many people think the Bible a part of the Jewish people that once exists and there's no longer exists based upon that philosophy. The principle of Moses.
Right.
Right, so they feel like, and all those rituals that speak of, they don't understand it, so they believe that was once upon a time. But
right,
the same people
and what do you want them to know?
I want them to know that the people that was Jewish people in those days are the same people living enslaved today. Now, the history of these people always end up in the victim of slave, not just in Egypt time, but another time like different time they went in slavery.
Yeah, but we don't know about the document which tells you that persons were enslaved in Egypt. You're going to have to show me that document.
We don't know. That people that we was in Egypt. No, let's go in Exodus chapter 4.
Well, listen, that's the thing is that you're going to go back to a story that I don't even believe in, and we do not have a space to go through that now. But we'd have
to take it up a different time.
Yeah, but in terms of Sankofa Inglo, you're taking us back to Egypt. You're taking us back to a people who had been through Egypt, who you say are the very same people who are now being enslaved.
Yeah, and I can prove it.
No, I'm not arguing with you.
Right.
If there's one set of people who have forgotten their names, forgotten their gods, and are now in slavery, it's the African race.
Right. Well, there's an history within Africa with the same people. It's the same people that came out of Africa and end up in this country, another country, that scatter around
Yeah,
hurt.
and we were talking about it last week when we talk about the Lemba people of Southern Africa. And remember, we have talked here about the Falashas, which is not a name that we should be using, but so that everybody understand. And remember, even this day in history, I think this day in history, or this month, this day in history, in terms 1987,
right.
It was when the Israel started the airlifting of the Falashas from Ethiopia, identifying them as the lost tribe of Dan. So we do understand the idea, and that is why we say go back and fetch your history from Jerusalem. Go back.
Right, we have to go way back in history in order to understand our life.
Yes.
Why we are.
But we must not get confused with the stories in between.
There's no confusion when you go back in history, because it's written.
Yes.
And if you go far back, you will find the truth.
That's right. Thank you so much, my brother.
The truth is the past and present.
Go back.
And some things you can't change.
That's right.
Right. I never introduced myself. My name is Frederick Hill.
Okay, Frederick, thank you so much.
And I just wanted to, there's some information I need from you. Mm-hmm. And I keep listening to your program, but I never get a chance to call and speak to you directly.
All right. So in terms of information that you need from me, you can call me any day at IRA FM.
Okay, at IRA FM.
Yeah, man.
Okay, I like your program, but there's some African history that are the tie with the Jews and Israelites, why they were sold into slavery. And I think people need to know the reality of what happened back in those days, why we become a victim, why we were sold to the Europeans.
And this is one of the things that we're saying, that even that slavery was an interruption, a wicked and a vicious one.
There was a reason for the slavery.
But even that aspect of our history, we have to go back and face.
You have to go back and face that reality.
Yes.
Because we keep repeating history.
And we're doing
we don't start ourselves up.
We're doing it.
Yeah, what's up? Good morning again. The answer to the question that you asked.
Yes.
The answer, bottom line. The bottom line.
No, Sunday's in it, right? Sunday's in the name of the program. What it was.
So what is it on the bottom line?
No, man, and I give no bottom line not in there at all. And yes,
but Sunday there.
Sunday in there, and If I can give another clue, because it had something to do with a cover version. Ernie Smith did the cover version of a song, and he called the song Sunday something.
Okay.
Right, and so if you know that, you know what the program was called, because the first theme for this program was that Ernie Smith cover version. All right? Okay. All right. By media generally. So, we had to hide the songs from Africa in between the other reggae songs is what we had to do. The program was threatened with being pulled from the air many times, but Carl Young, who was the owner and the founder of IRFM at the time, said to me, well, tell you what you do. Hide the African songs in between the reggae songs. So if you play 5 reggae, play 1 Africa, 5 reggae, 1 Africa, until it's really 1 Africa. You go. They go to the phone lines. Hello, caller.
Cabo.
Yes, Hotep.
Hotep. I want you put and leave a long time that you put a name for Hotep. My brother or my sister. Extend Hotep. My brother or my sister. I find the meaning of that and put it on the language the way I say Hotep.
I see what you mean. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, this is a part to call in from Center.
All right. Yes, give time.
I want, in the ear when you listen during the year, you say you want some people to chat with your thing in the revolution, all that program.
What, say that again?
Don't listen earlier on, don't the ear, you say like, who join with you to start the revolution, to strengthen revolution, and every people used to say them will go with you, they will go. All that part of the program they go.
But the revolution is a change. Aren't you part of a change?
Yeah, they say you want some soldier with you. All that part did it go?
I'm not sure what you're asking me about though.
Oh, it's a develop everything I develop around here. So
the revolution is in progress.
You want to join and you want to be the head of it.
But still, which part of them be the head of it? I mean, you know, if you join and that's why we said be the change you want to see, be the change where you are in your community, in your family. That's what we keep saying, and that's why we're asking who will be part of this change, who will be part of this revolution.
Yeah,
It means you're gonna stand up which part today. You're not going to allow oppression. You're not going to allow political tribalism. Exactly. So that's the thing. So you have to stand up in your ancestral spirit.
I mean, that's the way you feel like while them say read the one Bible. I love it, you know. I love what the man say.
Yeah, man. Give thanks,
man. We're take a whole lot of time. We don't want shots.
What's up, Andrea? Good morning.
Yes.
Schoolers here.
Yeah. Hey, schoolers. You know, say you must know the answer to that question, eh?
Is it Sunday Sunshine?
No, that is big A program that's coming up after me.
Andrea, it's still a puzzle because I'm here trying to find it and it's like a stuff because I remember I was listening to it from the very first program.
I know. So you should know. You should know.
I'm going to recap the tape again.
Schoolers, you know something lose off for you big time now.
I'm sorry about that, my sister.
All right.
Indeed, Sister Andrea.
Indeed, I bet you have a name for the program when it just
Well, better part of my name, but I don't know.
I can see. What was the first name of this program?
I'm going to make a wild guess.
Yeah.
Working with your clothes.
Yeah.
Could it be Sunday morning coming down?
There you go. You're working very well with the clue. That's what the name of the program, actually. Sunday morning coming down.
Yeah, you know, it's quite interesting to mention Ernest Smith today. You know, the first CD I ever buy is an Ernest Smith CD.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I'll give you a story, you know, because you see that Ernest Smith song?
Yes.
Even though it was an Ernest Smith song, it wasn't considered when Iris started, like, you know, one of the songs that can reggae on radio, because I never saw reggae. So,
right.
Exactly. So Bob Clark and myself, Bob Clark, who was then Bob Clark is one of the principal ideators of this station.
Yeah.
So Bob Clark, he came, and, you know, I remember we sat together, and I said, Bob, this is the theme I want for the program, and we play it and so on. And you know what Bob did? He go for a microphone, and when Ernest Smith, I think Sunday morning coming down, Bob just knock it out on the decks and the reggae, and like, boom, 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 boom. Yeah, man, and look up. He record that, you know, Bob, what you call it something, you know, Bob do that, you know, he mix it.
Okay, for real.
But the reggae version of it is just Bob beating out the tune on the desk.
Yes.
And then we record that now and put that as a bed now for the song. So when it's a play Sunday morning, I wake up Sunday morning with no place to lay my head. It didn't hurt. Right. And so we had Bob just regularizing the thing.
Okay.
And so we after that now I called Ernest Smith, 1990. I called Ernest Smith to say, is it okay with you that we're playing the song and we recognize it? And he said, yeah, man.
All right.
Remember that?
I'm sure that makes you feel airy.
And Uncle Ernie has been my brethren. Uncle Ernie has been my brethren from that time till this time, till now.
For real.
So you've won a book, Jamaica and the Debate Over Reparation for Slavery, a discussion paper prepared by the Jamaica National Bicentenary Committee.
Tell the people what do we know?
What do we know?
Bet from St. Elizabeth.
All right. You'll get your book.
Yeah, but
call me back tomorrow, because I'm working alone too. So call me back tomorrow, no?
No problem, darling. Let me say Happy New Year to you and all the staff of IRFM and all the listeners worldwide. All of my fans about the way I say, comment, hold me hardly I hear up on the radio these days.
Yeah.
Just tell them some boy, trust me. You know, sometimes I have to reach out, sometimes I have to take time out to sort out certain things on the ground, so you can be better when you're up there on the air.
I'll be very happy to hear, you know, because you're one of the foundation family members of Running African, so good to hear.
Yes, man. Trust me, Andrew. I've learned a lot in this space and in this place, you know?
Yeah, man. Give thanks, my brother. Give thanks.
Yeah, man. I'm big up all the people in Newtown, Black River, the whole world, St. Elizabeth, all across Jamaica, Holland Village people. Yeah, man. Enough respect to it, you know?
And link back tomorrow so we'll give you your book, all right?
Okay, darling. Enough respect. And go on do your thing. And Andrea.
Yes.
You played a song earlier last year, you know, and trust me, that song there, I never know it before, and listening to it means a lot. The name of the song is I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free.
Nina Simone, yes.
Yes, man, may I tell you?
Nina Simone, yeah.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Me rate that tune, may I tell you?
Me too. As a matter of fact, if you go in my vehicle now, there's a Nina Simone CD inside there, and it goes a boom, it's just Nina Simone, you know.
For real.
Yeah, give thanks, my father. About the doctrine, the Rastafari doctrine, about Jesus Christ, about the Bible, about many other issues to do with the unification of Rastafari, whether Rastafari should organize and centralize, and who should be leading that process. So there was a kind of a a melting pot in terms of the conversations that were happening around Rastafari. And the prophet, who then was a founder of the 12 Tribes of Israel, seemed to be the best person to talk to, because he was a person you could actually point to as, here is one person who was obviously the leader of a movement who we could identify, and was clearly so. And we saw an organizational element to the 12 Tribes of Israel, headed by the Prophet GAD at the time. So, assisted by Noel Simeon at the time, and others. The request was made for the interview. The doubt at the time was that the Prophet had never given a radio interview, had no intention of giving a radio interview, did not want to give a radio interview. And so, but still, we were trying to get that interview. And the rest is history, because you already know, July 13, 1997, we broadcast that interview. And so it was granted to us. I went to his home, and as a young journalist, because this was 7 years into the founding of IRFM, because IRFM started in 1990, and by 1997, we got that interview with the Prophet. That interview, I want to rebroadcast this morning as part of our Looking Back. I want to listen closely to some of what he said. Also want to listen closely to any references made to the way forward for Rastafari and so on. And so that's it. So one of the things that we're going to be doing here throughout the year, IRFM is celebrating 25 years. July 1990, we started test transmission. IRFM officially came on air August 1, 1990. That was not a fluke. It was deliberate on the part of Carl Young to have this come on air around Emancipation Day and on Emancipation Day. So August 1, 1990, and that's what now, 25 years. So 25 years of IRFM, 25 years of the Africa Forum running African. So one of the things that we're going to be doing throughout the year, from now until August 1, ever so often, is to rebroadcast one of the interviews that for me was a milestone, a highlight of a period. And the interview with the Prophet GAD was done in 1997, July 13, 1997. As I said before, someone who had never done a radio interview before, didn't do one after, although before he transcended, we were in discussions for one or two more of these interviews, and he had already agreed to those interviews, by the way, but transcended before we got a chance to do them. But he's never spoken to a media house before or since the Prophet GAD. In this interview that I did many years ago, so sounding a little bit different, but here we go.
Running African caught up with the Prophet GAD at his Hope Road home, and for the first time ever, he consented to speak publicly on radio. He tells us first about the history of the 12 tribes.
I was being converted in 1961, and I read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation twice. Well, I was being sent. I was called and sent, resurrected and sent to do this work. And when I read the Bible, I strongly see that there is a gap is there to be filled. And I believe I am one of them that's sent to do it.
Where did the movement start? Where were you at the time?
At Trenchtown. But I was called when I was living at Outlook Avenue, that is at Rockford Garden.
What form did it take? How did you convince people of what it is that you were sent to do?
Well, I keep telling them that if they read the Bible, a chapter there, they will see what I am doing, if it is right or wrong. Well, majority read the Bible and them say what I am saying is there, so they are part of it.
How is the 12 tribes, before we get back to the whole movement itself, how is the 12 tribes, or the tribes, the different tribes identified? How did you know who was Simeon and who was Levi and so on?
Yes, well, there's a record in the Bible, if you see, to say that Reuben represent the high, and Simeon represent the ears, and such like. It is all there, but there is a part there that the maid have 2 children, and the other one have 2. So that is how comes the 12 tribes of Israel. These are recorded there, you know. I have seen most of the things that I'm doing in the Bible.
Okay. Some more about the tribes and how they identify themselves.
By a month. Each month, like Reuben represents April, and Simeon represents May, and June represents Levi, and Judah.
How did you make the connection with the tribes and the months? How did you know that May was Simeon?
Well, you see, I mean, Reuben, you see, so you know that is April, and you're here. That is May, June, July, August, September, October, which is the back, November, your penis, November, December, the knee, January, February, and March.
The 12 tribes of Israel has been accused of being elitist, catering to the middle class and whites. Is that a fair criticism?
No, that is not a fair criticism, because we're not catering for only one set of people. Out of one blood is all nation. So it is all called, but we know that not everybody is going to see what we are doing.
I know a lot of people listening now are saying to themselves, but no, we always did think that only a certain type of people were members of the 12 tribe of Israel. And isn't it interesting that a Rastafarian group, Kate, when most Rastafarians are saying down with the white down pressers, that 12 tribes of Israel actually embrace all races?
That is correct. We read in the Bible that out of one blood all nation. So it would be wrong for us to only say one race. We wouldn't survive that way, and God make all of us. So that is where I is.
All right. The 12 tribes of Israel is seen as closer to Christianity than other Rastafarian groups. Is there a basic difference in the doctrine?
Yes, there's a basic difference because we teach Christ, and that die and rose again, and that die for our sin. We see that person. So that is a different teaching, because not many see this teaching that Christ is the person.
All right. I want to remind you that we're speaking with the Prophet GAD, who is the leader, the head, the founder of the 12 tribes of Israel. We want to move on now to the doctrine. Recently, we've had much debate on this program, Winning Africa, and on other programs about the divinity of His Majesty, the Emperor Haile Selassie, as it relates to the return of Jesus Christ. What are your thoughts on the matter?
Well, Christ is to return and sit on the throne of David. So I strongly believe that, Christ is going to come and sit on the throne of David.
I want you to, you know that you have said something very important here, and something that may disturb the Rastafarian movement in Jamaica. Christ, you're talking about the return of Christ.
Yes, I am talking about the return of Christ is going to sit on the throne of David.
Is that, are you making a differentiation between Jesus Christ and Haile Selassie?
Yes, I am making a different definition, because Christ is here yesterday and today and forever. And even if His Majesty said, Him saved not by the main character, but by the blood of Jesus Christ.
All right, let's move on. The doctrinal principles of the 12 tribes of Israel. At the outset of this program, I said that you, as the head of a Rastafarian organization yourself, you don't wear dreadlocks. Do you have specific principles as it relates to hair, diet, and the reading of the Bible?
No, well, when I read the Bible, I say, there is not a hair doctrine. Yet we know that man, his hair is too long, but there's no law to compel him to trim. So as for me now, I say everyone have the right to wear him dreadlocks as long as they want to wear it. And nobody shouldn't have anything to say about it. I read the Bible and I prefer to pull your hair. When you pull your hair, you comb your hair. Like I don't trim, but I pull. So you have some of the dreadlocks dread and you have some that pull them here.
I have heard it said, even on this station RFM, that if you don't have your dreadlocks, you can't go to Zion. How do you respond to that?
Not a year doctrine. You see it by grace through Christ. So here can't save you.
What about diet?
Diet. Well, it's already recorded in the book what you must eat from what you not to eat. Yet a man free to do what he want to do. Specifically recorded there in the Bible what to eat, cloven-footed, and what not to eat. That's through the code.
The 12 tribes of Israel, I know members of the 12 tribes of Israel that I've come in contact with. One of the differences that I found is that 12 tribes of Israel members will eat meat, for example, whereas most other Rastafarians are vegetarians.
Yes, well, there's so many things to eat. Before meat, it was vegetables. Afterward, you see that you must eat this meat and you must eat that meat and you must eat that meat. But before it was vegetables. And then afterward, now when the flood, then now we get meat to eat and separate from what not to eat.
Let us look at the reading of the Bible, because I know that one of your main principles is reading the Bible. Tell me about that.
Yes, well, it showed to me His Majesty even give me a little hint that in the Bible, you know, I'm glorifying the Bible, and from a little child I was being taught to read the Bible. Now, when I look, I see that to understand fully, it is good to read timely and to read for yourself. A chapter there, it is preferable. Still anyone free that they can read the Bible or they want to read it.
And you've been in this movement for a very long time. You're the founder. Does that mean that you have continued reading the Bible a chapter a day until now? So you must have read it a couple of times.
Yes, I read it a couple of times, twice. I know again I got through it, but I don't read it as much as...
All right. Well, many argue that the Bible is not 100% reliable, but that the reading of the Bible actually is a main principle of yours and of the 12 tribes of Israel. How do you respond to the skeptics who say that the Bible is not reliable and burn the Bible, so to speak?
In the time, it showed that you'll have them curse God, curse the king, and such like. So I don't expect for them to accept certain things, but those who accept, well, give thanks to them.
Still on the doctrines and so on, but moving on to rites of passage, how does the movement, the 12 tribes of Israel, address birth within the movement, the adolescence period when the child is a teenager, and marriage, and also death?
Well, if I could understand clearly, I know that you have a birth, and you have, after birth, you have a child, adolescent, and then now they're supposed to, when they grow up, they're supposed to marry, and after they marry, they're supposed to help their fellow men, and when that come, it come. But right now, we try to avoid that death business. But when that come, you can run from it. As for us, we don't die. We only sleep, waiting for the resurrection.
Are there any specific ceremonies concerning, for instance, birth? Is a child within the 12 tribes of Israel christened or blessed by you as the prophet?
I don't do any christening. I wasn't told to christen, so I don't do any christening. They can christen when they're born. You know that you have to christen and then.
But not necessarily within any strict rules or so on. What about marriage? Are there any specific?
Marriage is a holy vow, right? And I know that marriage is right. So if you see a partner you love, then get married. That is as far as I'm concerned on marriage.
The 12 tribes of Israel currently is not having regular meetings. When can we expect the resumption of these meetings?
We were discussing about it, that I think the time has come for it to start, you know. But we was organizing for years and keeping a lot of meetings. So we take a break, a rest. Because the same teaching over and over, so we take a rest. But soon, we work on just that way. We work there out. We work back there to proceed as it was before. And then taking back some of the members who would like to be a part.
Do you have any idea how soon, within a couple of months or anything like that?
Not yet. I can't say it. Probably a little more, but not right at the moment.
All right. How does one who is interested in becoming a member of the 12 tribes of Israel, how does one do that?
We'll have to wait until we announce the time when we're going to take in members, and then they can.
Okay. The monarchy. Discussions on the monarchy have served within the Rastafarian movement to separate the movement. Many see Haile Selassie as the final king. And how does the 12 tribes of Israel view the continuation of the monarchy in relation to the current political climate in Ethiopia?
Yes, well, His Majesty will be the final king because he's not there now, and we have other kings to come. right? So, as for me, I strongly believe that the monarchy will establish when due time.
Haile Selassie, contrary to what a lot of other people are saying, is not the final king.
No, he's not the final king.
Well, could you tell me a little bit about the succession then?
The succession, His Majesty, you know him named Haile Selassie already, as the heir to the throne, and he is not at the moment there, and him also named Jacob, but Jacob is there now, so we are looking for the speedy return of Jacob to Ethiopia.
How does this fit in with the teaching of not necessarily the 12 tribes of Israel, but of Rastafarians in general, who because at first you answered that anyway about the divinity of Haile Selassie, and you have actually made a distinction between Haile Selassie and Jesus Christ. But many Rastafarians don't see anything outside of Haile Selassie, which means that he's the final king to sit on the throne. How do we resolve that?
As I said before, he is not the final king. But I strongly believe that Christ is going to sit on the throne, but His Majesty is not the final king. You have more king, because Haile Selassie is not there, and you have Jacob supposed to be seated shortly.
Do you see the monarchy being restored in Ethiopia? As a matter of fact, because of what is happening in Ethiopia now, we know that Haile Selassie tried to go back recently. We don't know what happened with that. He didn't go back. But do you see a restoration of the monarchy in Ethiopia?
No, they don't accept the monarchy. But at least there is a amount of people there that looking forward, because that is the only person they believe could be able to get back the unity of the Ethiopian people.
How do you see it happening, the restoration of the monarchy?
When the time comes, he will overturn, and whose right it is, he will give it to them. So when the fullness of time comes, we don't know when, but we're sure that it must happen.
Is this according to prophecy, that the monarchy must be restored?
Oh, yes.
Is the monarchy a dinosaur in the age of democracy, do you think? And could it be anything more than a constitutional monarchy?
I don't fully understand that.
Right now, when Haile Selassie was trying to return the last time, he was told that he could only come back as a constitutional monarch with no powers whatsoever. Do you see anything else happening from that, apart from that? Or do you see the monarchy being restored to such a point where the monarchy is once again as it was in the days of Haile Selassie, ruling Ethiopia?
Keep saying over and over that when the time comes, then we're sure that we're going to have a king to seat up. It's going to take some time. Yeah, but he's going to be seated for sure.
Rumors have been circulating that Prince Zara Jacob is mentally deranged and therefore not fit to succeed. What light can you shed on this matter?
Well, I don't know him as somebody that is mentally disturbed. He was here the last time. Everybody see him and such like. He is functioning normal as far as I understand when I left him in Manchester. But I don't see him as a deranged person. It's really, unbelievable.
All right, and we must point out at this point, I don't know if you want me to do this, but that the Zara Jacob is very close to the 12 tribes of Israel.
Oh, yes, he's very close. He's bridging them and sister in Manchester.
Is he a member of the 12 tribes of Israel?
He's a member of the 12 tribes of Israel, yes.
Prince Ermias, the nephew of Haile Selassie, what is his position in the royal family?
Yes, I have no much knowledge about it, but I heard that him is one of the crown councils. That is as far as I know. I don't see further what he's doing and what he's saying. But I don't have no much knowledge about him. But I know that him is one of the crown councils.
Has Ermias been in contact or in touch with you?
No, we haven't spoken, and I don't know him, and he don't know me yet.
Right. Have you been officially informed of his visit in August?
Yes. When I say officially, also when I read this, I have a document here before that he was planning to come, and now the time, arrived for him to be here in August.
Is it a part of the doctrine of the 12 tribes of Israel that the monarchy must be physically restored? You touched on that before, that it is prophecy, but is it a part of your teaching that?
Yes, that is a part of our teaching, that the monarchy must restore, just like how the sun and the moon and the stars is there, and that nobody can remove them. Same way, the monarchy must restore.
The 12 Tribes of Israel currently has the largest settlement on Shashamane. Is Ethiopia the final home? And what about the rest of Africa?
Just Shashamane is not the final home. The whole of Africa. One king shall rule over them all. And also the whole of Africa, and especially Jerusalem.
Okay, you say all of Africa, especially Jerusalem, and I'm sure a lot of people are saying, but Jerusalem is not Africa.
Jerusalem is Africa. Jerusalem is a part of Africa as long as certain things happen and it break away. But there's no argument that Jerusalem is not a part of Africa. We are sure.
So when we speak of the New Jerusalem, what are we talking of?
Jerusalem. When we're talking about the New Jerusalem, we're talking about the Jerusalem in Asia Minor. New Jerusalem is a different thing altogether, definition.
I want to just look a little bit more at that, Jerusalem being the final home, all of Africa, especially Jerusalem. You know, how will that work? How will that happen?
Come see that they take out a lot of it open there. If you notice the history show you that they always was saying that the people in Ethiopia is not the Jews. All right, but then suddenly there's a changes that them is the Jews, and them take out most of them and carry them to Jerusalem. So you see everything clear there that the people who is Israel and was in Ethiopia, them come from the ancestors was from Jerusalem, and them send them back. So here some of us out here now, it was quite interesting that those who they take from there and they carry there, they said they are the tribe of Dan. So them identify themselves as one of the tribe of Dan. The people them who leave and go to Jerusalem that then take out from Eritrea, no? The Falashal? Yeah.
Who should lead the repatriation exercise? Because there are so many different organizations all over the world, African organizations, non-African organizations. How involved should they be in helping black people who want to go back to Africa?
The first thing, the OAU is supposed to be the country that come together and help voice for the return of the people in the Western Hemisphere back to Africa. I strongly believe they supposed to should be playing a part to help we to come home, who want to come.
What about reparations from Europe, from America, from Britain?
Yes, well, we're going to need help because, you know, the ship is there, the plane is there, so we're looking for them to help to transport us back. As even them said the other day, say, you know, the only thing to do now is to send away back the people them. And most of the people them that they send away, those are the people that help back the country.
So we get back to who should lead this exercise, this Back to Africa movement. Who do you think should lead that?
Well, the Rastafarian must come together and elect a person to represent the body. And then out of that, then we can be able to write to these different people and to tell them, you know, that we are united. We would like them to help us.
Is the Shashamane land grant still in effect?
The Shashamane land grant is still in effect, but there's a lot of things to clear up within the settlement.
Do you want to elaborate on that? Some of the things that we need to clear up?
Not at the moment.
Right, so you say it is still in effect, but there are things that need to be cleared up. Now, what is the 12 Tribes' position on the EWS claim that all settlers who of the land, that people settle in Shashamane are squatters if they do not settle through the permission of the EWS?
It's really surprising to know that they are saying that who is there on the land, squatters. How can African going back home can become a squatter? It is unbelievable.
Okay.
Squatters. Impossible. Right.
Okay. Is there a need for Rastafarians to organize and centralize?
Oh, yes. There is an urgent need for the Rastafarian to organize. Yes, there is.
How do you think this process can begin?
Well, somebody that is capable of call a meeting, and if they're sincere, they call a meeting and hope and trust that from there we can get somewhere.
But you as a leader of the 12 Tribes of Israel, you see a great need. Do you see yourself playing any part in that?
I strongly believe that I will help play my little part that I can as a person who's organizing over the years when that process...
Should there be a political as well as a spiritual arm of Rastafarian?
There's a political movement is there. But I am not here to deal with it. I am not fighting them. I am here to deal with the spiritual part of it, not politically.
What are your thoughts on the Rastafarian Centralization Organization, the RCO?
I have no knowledge at the moment. I only know that them is here, so it's only left now to see what they are saying before I can give a definite, statement about them. But I don't have no knowledge presently.
The RCO, they have been around for a little while. Haven't they contacted you officially, informing you of the organization and inviting you to join with them in the centralization process?
Came here, they sent a letter inviting us to help with the school. But we never get to it. So that is the only letter that I know that I have so far, but I don't get any letter them inviting me of such to come.
That is quite interesting that is happening, that we have a Rastafarian Centralization Organization and that the head of the biggest, the most organized Rastafarian movement in the world has not been invited to be a part of that centralization process. If you were invited, would you talk with them and see what's happening?
Yes, I believe the time has come for me to play a part, with it. So I think I would go and hope and trust that they proceed orderly and they have no commotion, because I don't deal with the combustion, the confusion. But I strongly believe that the time has come for the Rastafarian to come together.
I feel very good to hear that. The 12 Tribes of Israel has undoubtedly the most organized body of Rastafarians in the world, as I said before. What role should the movement play in organizing Rastafarians in Jamaica and in the rest of the world?
Well, at least we are organizing for a good while now, and we have the organ. The 12 Tribes of Israel is in Jamaica. It starts here. It is in Ethiopia. It is in the United States. It is in the United Kingdom, Sweden. It is in Germany, New Zealand, Tobago, Ghana, Australia, Kenya, and Grenada.
That is 12 tribes.
12 tribe organization in these other countries, and some other country is still there. But
I'm thinking that since the 12 tribe has done so well in organizing the 12 tribes of Israel, is there a particular role now that the 12 tribe could play in organizing the rest, in helping then to organize the rest of Rastafarians?
As I just said a while ago, that I think could help to play a part, give a helping hand, not as somebody come to take over nothing, but as a helping hand to help organize them, So we're looking forward.
The prophet GAD, the man who boldly declares Jesus Christ, the head of a Rastafarian movement who doesn't wear dreadlocks, the man who coined the phrase, a chapter a day. The Kebra-Nagast, or the Book of the Glory of Kings of Ethiopia, has been in existence for at least 1,000 years and contains a true history of the origin of the Solomonic line of kings in Ethiopia. It is as the ultimate authority on the history of the conversion of the Ethiopians from the worship of the sun, moon, and stars to that of our Lord God of Israel. Jesus Christ and Menelik, the son of Solomon by the Queen of Sheba, were sons of Solomon, and so they were akin to each other. But Christ is the Son of God, and therefore, being the kinsman of Christ, Menelik was divine. The Kebra-Nagast asserts that the kings of Ethiopia, who were descended from Menelik, were of divine origin, and that their words and deeds were those of gods. Haile Selassie, a devoted Christian, reflected that divine nature and maintained the struggle of good over evil, continually inspiring.
All right. God, so I stood here, just looking at the CD player, really as if I was watching, the whole interview being played out in front of me. And I'm one up on you because I was transported back to the place the home of the Prophet GAD and the place where we sat when we were doing that interview, and I was seeing the tools that I was using, the Marantz tape and the big microphone and the Prophet's patience and, you know, my notes in my hands. And so I'm transported back to the time. But you know, we have been talking about Sankofa Ing, going back to fetch it, and one of the things we said before is to listen closely to what he said about, you know, the various issues. The 12 tribes of Israel, the house is still unrest as far as I know, and in this interview was done in 1997, July 1997. We were talking about organizing and centralizing and so on. We talked about the RCO. You know, the reparations and the restoration of the monarchy, Shashamani, and so on. So these are some of the issues that we're still talking about. You know, and a lot of these issues are in our power to change. But I don't know that we have progressed. We have come a long way, but in terms of progress, let's judge that. The idea of carrying back some of these interviews as we look back to go forward is to challenge ourselves on where we are on the road to liberation, to freedom, to full free, to realizing who we are. Why do we look back? We look back because if it happened 10,000 years ago or 10 minutes ago, it occupies the very same space in our consciousness.
Gentlemen, Prime Minister of Jamaica, Honorable Bruce.
This is news from IRI FM, Jamaica's non-aligned news voice.
Good morning, I'm Lanigay Green with the local and international headlines. An elderly man died in a fire at his 3-bedroom home in Sturge Town, St. Anne, Friday night. That is 75-year-old farmer Albert James of Sturge Town. Reports from the Brownstown police are that about 11:10 p.m. on Friday, residents saw smoke coming from Mr. James's house and summoned the police and fire department. One unit from Brownstown Fire Department carried out cooling down operations. The charred remains of Mr. James were later found in the rubble. The body of a man was found in Parrytown near Ocherea, St. Anne early this morning. Residents have identified him as Junior Blackwood. It's understood that Blackwood was shot and killed about 1 a.m. The first batch of farm workers for the Overseas Employment Program of the Ministry of Labour will be dispatched this week. The ministry says more than 340 workers are scheduled to take up employment opportunities on various farms in Canada. The workers are scheduled to leave this Tuesday, January 6. In news overseas, officials in Nigeria say the Islamist group Boko Haram has seized a town and a military base used by a multinational force set up to fight the insurgents. The senator for Borno North said troops abandoned the base in the town of Baga after it was attacked yesterday. Residents who fled by boat to neighboring Chad said many people had been killed and the town set ablaze. Baga, scene of a Nigerian army massacre in 2013, was one of the last towns in the area under government control. Finally, search teams have recovered 4 more bodies from the Java Sea as the hunt to find the main wreckage of Air Asia flight QZ8501 enters a second week. The search and rescue chief said 34 bodies have now been found, as well as 5 large objects. But bad weather has forced divers to suspend their bid to find the plane's main body section, where most of the bodies are believed to be trapped. The plane, which was carrying 162 people, crashed last Sunday. Those were the local and international headlines. News next at 11:45. You can go online to irifm.net to view some of the stories. Like us on Facebook.com/IRIFM News. Follow us on Twitter at IRIFM_news. From the IRIFM Newsroom, I'm Lanigay Green.
That was...
They don't even go before that. They look back to the Holocaust. We can look back to the Ma'afa. which is our Holocaust. But not to get trapped in it. And how do they look back without getting trapped? Because they now rule the world. Israel does. How do they do this without getting trapped? And how do they look back at the same time ensuring that it doesn't happen again? That's a big question. So just some of the questions that we're throwing out. So I was saying that one of the things we can do is to talk to our children too about who we are, who we were, even while they are going forward. Because if we don't look back to, we also have another problem. We have the problem of a generation gap. In that we have not looked back. We're not looking back in our homes. We're not looking back in our communities. We're not looking back in our families. And as a result of that, we have forgotten to teach our children about who they are, about who we are and where we're coming from, and how come we are where we are today, and what our roles and responsibilities are in going forward, and their roles and responsibilities in moving forward. So let me start by looking back on one fact that can assist you to talk to your children. Let's talk about medicine.
No easy victory.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the China in Africa podcast. I'm Eric Olander, and as always, I'm joined by Cobus Van Stetten of Wits University, normally in Johannesburg, South Africa, but today joining us from Beijing, China. Very good evening to you, Cobus.
Good evening.
Well, I said Beijing, China, because this is your second trip to China. You've been kind of gallivanting your way from south to north, where you attended a big China-Africa conference in Guangzhou, and now you're in Beijing. And I thought before we get into our show, it might be interesting for some of our listeners to kind of hear some of your impressions of a South African wandering the streets of Beijing, and what your impressions are of China, and kind of what are some of your observations that you might want to share with your fellow Africans about kind of what Beijing is and maybe what it isn't.
What was very interesting for me, having, kind of going to Beijing and then to Guangzhou and now back to Beijing, is how different these cities are. Obviously, China is a massive place, but what struck me is how different the kind of the urban layout is. Guangzhou is much more, is obviously a massive city, but the urban fabric is much higher and tighter. Kind of like everything's closer together and the buildings are much higher. In Beijing, I was surprised at how relatively, obviously there's lots of different parts of Beijing that are all different, but, kind of generally how much lower it is, and then how wide it is and how massive everything is.
It is massive.
Including these crazy kind of like 8-lane roads, kind of crisscrossing the city. Also, kind of it's just, I love subways, and the Beijing subway is actually a joy. Kind of it makes getting around really easy. And it's just, kind of it really is. It feels like the center of power. Kind of like you really kind of experience, kind of that the kind of the power of the state.
What you have to really appreciate is that when I first went to Beijing in 1989, 6 months after Tiananmen Square, there was more bikes than cars. There were really no private cars. There was, if you can imagine today, almost no cars on the road, mostly bicycles. There was only one McDonald's. There was no skyscrapers. The tallest buildings were around the Forbidden City. I mean, it's amazing, and this is the inspiration I think that a lot of Africans take away from looking at what happened in China over the past 30 years, is that it went from effectively a mid-level African city to being what you called the center of power in 25 years.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it's impossible for me to really imagine Beijing with no cars, because there's cars everywhere. Kind of now, I mean, massive luxury sedans, wherever you go. So it's a really interesting thing to think about.
Well, other than the weather, which I'm sure it's a lot cooler there than it is in South Africa, it's fascinating to hear some of the impressions. But we're not here to talk about your trip to China, which interesting as it might be. We're going to, here we are on our last show of the year. It's in December. So we thought today what we would do is do a year in review. And we're going to do a little bit different instead of chronicle all the big things that happened in the year, which is what most people do on their year in review shows. We're going to each pick 3 stories that we think were the most important of the year. We actually haven't shared which stories there are. So we don't know what the other's going to say. So it's very possible that we actually pick the same things. Now, they can be stories, themes, trends, anything that's happened in the China-Africa relationship. So, Cobus, why don't you go ahead with your story number 1 or theme number 1 of the year in review 2014 between China and Africa. What do you think was one of the most important things that we should talk about?
The role of the complications of the economic relationship between China and Africa is becoming, I think, a very important theme. Moody's came out a little bit earlier this year, about a month ago, warning that African economies are vulnerable to a China slide. The South African rand has really declined over the last year, and I mean that's not only China, the fault of China, but it is linked to worries about China's ability to absorb African commodities, and I think this link between African economies and the Chinese economy on the way up, but also kind of on the way down, especially as trade figures coming from Beijing have made everyone very worried over the last week. I think this is a big theme, and how it's going to be possible for African economies to kind of diversify and to kind of shelter themselves from a possible Chinese decline.
Well, it's interesting you picked that topic because just today, in fact, a report came out of 40 developing countries around the world who have over 50% or who have China as their largest trading partner. Africa represented 20 of those 40 countries. Remarkable amount. Listen to these statistics. 82% of Sierra Leone's trade is with China. 49% of Mauritania's trade is with China. 48% of the Republic of Congo's trade is with China. Now, a lot of that trade is in oil. Now, oil is at $60 a barrel, and they're forecasting oil to remain at that low price for quite some time. So the effect that may have alone, just slumping commodity prices, that may have on African economies, tying themselves so close to the China economy, may in fact be very, very dangerous, as you say. So I think that's an excellent choice this year. Let me just ask you, in terms of your prognostication looking to 2015, do you think that there will be any decoupling? And the reason I ask this in some ways is because your president, who I will call a hypocrite, because your president said, and I'm probably not the first person to call Jacob Zuma a hypocrite, but
He's been called lots of things.
He has been called lots of things, but here was the reason why I call him a hypocrite. He was one of the most vocal critics of China, who said basically that South Africa, and he was, I think, kind of speaking on behalf of the continent, cannot depend too much on trade with China. It's not sustainable, was his words. And yet, what did he do when he went to Beijing just a couple weeks ago? He just signed deal after deal after deal after deal. And he's getting South Africa much closer to China than almost any country right now. I mean, he and Xi Jinping were like best buddies when he was in Beijing. And so that's the hypocritical approach. On the one hand, he says it's not sustainable. We shouldn't depend too much. His own stock market, the JSE, moves up and down every single time there's a big piece of Chinese economic data that's released. And yet, what does he do? He pulls them closer, makes them more interdependent. What's your thoughts on that?
Kind of in the first place, I think that quote of his calling it the trade unsustainable, that might have been, kind of written or taken for as more significant by the outside the worldwide press than it probably was intended to be. Or, I think, the sad thing with President Zuma, and kind of not to disparage him, is that it might be a mistake to look for too much of a kind of overarching scheme in one particular utterance. It's difficult for me to say that he necessarily. I don't think that was necessarily a kind of a sustained or systemic kind of critique of the China-Africa relationship. I think it might well have been a negotiation tactic, or some kind of response to kind of African leader politics or interactions. I mean, it's difficult for me to say, but I think the general trajectory of South Africa has been closer to China. That has been the clear kind of thrust.
There's no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me give my pick, and I'm going to pick the May 4th to 11th visit to China by Chinese Prime Minister Li Keqiang. Now, a state visit of a premier from China or a head of state, really at this stage in the game, is not that remarkable. In fact, Xi Jinping himself made Africa a part of his first itinerary, his first visits when he was named president of China. So that by itself isn't that interesting. What's interesting is actually this emergence of a more humble diplomacy coming from China towards Africa. And he admitted to what he called growing pains in the China-Africa relationship. And I think, you know, Cobus, you as a student of Japan and Chinese foreign policy in Japan, towards Japan, I live here in Vietnam, here in the Southeast Asia, just off the coast of the East Vietnam Sea, South China Sea, depending on who you're talking to. Just like the Diaoyu Senkaku, you know, you have to be very sensitive in this part of the world. We are not used to seeing a humble Chinese foreign policy or any humility of any kind. We're used to seeing an incredibly robust, aggressive, strong foreign policy. In fact, just this year, at the end of the year, President Xi Jinping came out with a major foreign policy address that really had kind of reclassified China as a great power and will have great power diplomacy. And yet in Africa, we see a much more softer side, a more flexible side, a more humble foreign policy that we don't see with almost any other part of the world. And I thought that was remarkable on that trip. If you recall, that trip, Cobus, was Ethiopia, Angola, Nigeria, and Kenya. What are your thoughts?
Yes, I agree with you. That was a really notable moment. And it really, I think, showed how sensitive China has become to issues and, you know, kind of tropes and discourses and sensitivities in Africa. At the same time, I think, you know, kind of when we discussed it at that time, we both agreed that in a way, it's kind of no skin off China's nose to make that confession in the case of Africa. In fact, China can only gain from looking softer in relation to Africa. There's nothing to lose there. Whereas, you know, kind of looking softer in relation to ASEAN or Japan or the United States, there's a lot more, you know, kind of vulnerability in those relationships. And so China needs to project a lot more strength. In the case of Africa, looking conciliatory, looking soft, looking kind of, you know, kind of willing to listen to Africa's, you know, kind of concerns only helps China.
And I think just to pick you up on that point here, the stakes are very low for China in Africa. And I think that's a very key point here that you bring up, which is the stakes are very, very high in ASEAN. They're high with Japan, and they're high with the United States. You know, clearly it's regional neighbors. It's got security. It's got trade. It's got a lot of different complex relationships and complex history in this region. Obviously, with the United States, its largest trading partner, that is a very complicated relationship that transcends almost every level of diplomacy, from environment to cyber to you know, economic, cultural, academic, all these different areas. And then Japan, they've got a very complicated historical relationship. So as your point, I think it's well taken, which is that with Africa, it's easy because it's less than 5% of China's overall trade. It's a feel-good kind of thing, and the stakes are kind of low. So if they mess up, it's no big deal if they kind of admit some frailty there.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see whether that leads to a kind of a richer relationship, you know, kind of what will come from the African side, you know, kind of more than just simply complaints or kind of, you know, kind of dark mutterings or kind of the general kind of infighting between publics and leaders, you know, kind of whether it's possible for Africa to really gain some kind of traction in the relationship. That's a big question, I think.
Okay. What's your second key theme, story, highlight of the year?
For me, it's a deal that is indicative of other kinds of deals. It's the $12 billion Nigerian rail deal that was announced a month or so ago. Massive new rail expansions in Nigeria, you know, kind of built by Chinese contractors and funded by Chinese investment. I chose it because it seems to be kind of indicative of a kind of investment that is both historical and new. So obviously the Tazara Railway between Tanzania and Zambia is this incredibly symbolic Cold War era Chinese investment that really kind of, you know, made a massive change in African economies at that time. And now China is again, you know, kind of investing massively in rail. And I think rail unlike mining, for example, has this, it's just such a positive kind of contribution to any kind of economy. It's so expensive to put in, and it lasts for so long. It has such a kind of massive impact. So, China's rail investment in East Africa is really big. I mean, it's been troubled in certain cases, especially in Uganda, but generally it's gonna transform East African economy. It's massive in Nigeria. There's talk about big rail projects in Mali. So I think as a kind of a feel good kind of investment story, I think the prevalence of rail investment is really important.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I had railway diplomacy on my honorable mention list, so we were close on thinking that was the top story of the year. But let me pick up on that. So we've got rail projects right now, and big rail projects in Addis Ababa, in the standard gauge railway throughout East Africa, cutting through Kenya, that just started construction this year. Obviously, we have light rail projects going on in Nigeria, in addition to the $12 billion deal. By the way, that $12 billion deal was China's largest overseas deal. Now, let's bring up a comment from Howard French, who we spoke with earlier this year. If you recall, he's the author and journalist who wrote China's Second Continent, and he talked about how these rail deals really economically are not that favorable for Africans, that there are cheaper ways and cheaper loans that they can get access to. However, one point that I wanted to bring up, and I'm afraid that I didn't ask this to Howard French as well, is a little bit of a contrast between the Chinese rail construction and what we saw during the colonial period. Now, from the colonial period, the British built from the mines to the ports. The purpose of the rails was to get the raw materials to the port to extract out and to ship out back to Europe. But one of the interesting things is these light rail projects in metro centers, and also a lot of the rail projects that the Chinese are building are from population center to population center rather than just to the ports. In Mali, in that case, the one they're talking about is a mine-to-port deal. But for a landlocked country, that's kind of significant. So in some ways, I don't see that in a neo-colonial type of context that a lot of people do. Talk to me a little bit about the controversy of these rail deals, either the financing, or do you sense or smell a neo-colonial whiff in terms of the Chinese doing this for their own self-interest to extract natural resources?
I don't really. I think because African governments, have they are the ones putting out the tender. So obviously some of these rail systems are going to be used for extraction, but I think it's a form of extraction where African governments are have more agency to decide kind of what level the extraction will be. I think the issue is less a kind of a neo-colonialist project kind of orchestrated by China, and more how much vision do these individual African governments have? To which extent is the only kind of logic that they're thinking of one of mining stuff and then exporting them, as seems to be the case in Mali? And to which extent do they have, do they want to use these rail networks to try and make something more valuable, something where, where there's some form in South African parlance of beneficiation, where these raw minerals are transformed into something more valuable that can be sold for more on the open market. Mm-hmm. I don't think China is really making any real decisions about where these rail lines go. I think those decisions seem to be made by African governments.
Okay, let me go on to my second pick of the year in review 2014, and I'm going to talk about ivory. And ivory has been a hot topic on our Facebook page. It's probably the most followed topic by non-China Africa geeks like you and me on the outside world, particularly in the West, where there seems to be a lot more attention paid to the fate of elephants and rhinos than there are to almost any other issue in this. But there's been good news and bad news on this. Let's bring you all the way back to January 6th of 2014. And China launched, started the year with a 6-ton ivory crush. Now, this was the first time that China had ever done anything like this, and it raised a lot of expectations that maybe 2014 would be the year that China really starts to get serious on cracking down on the illegal trade of ivory, and really maybe even think about a legal shift in the sale and the transportation of ivory in China, of course, that didn't come true at all. Then we saw during the Li Keqiang visit in May, when he was in Kenya, he offered up $10 million for wildlife protection. And again, people thought, wow, this might be an opening, and at least that the Chinese are publicly now starting to do things that they never did before in terms of ivory. But at the same time, we started to see some other things that were happening, much more depressing. Reports came in, most stunningly, from the Environmental Investigation Agency in the United Kingdom, which accused Xi Jinping's delegation when he visited Africa, I think it was in 2013, his delegation actually of smuggling ivory out, and how ivory demand went up wherever his delegation would go. Then there was a report from Save the Elephants and the Aspinall Foundation that came out in December 2014, just not that long ago, which talked about how the illegal sale of ivory in China, the amazing amount of demand for ivory in China, is really on a pace right now that will force extinction of Africa's elephants within a generation, and that there's really nothing that's being done to slow that. Now, on the flip side, a lot of writers came out and said, well, this isn't only a China problem. This is also an Africa problem. And there is an African administration, corruption, and law enforcement issue that's not being addressed here. So on that side, we had a lot of big news. We saw much tougher prison sentences coming out of Kenya and Tanzania, among other places. In Kenya, a 40-year-old man by the name of Tan Yongjian was ordered to pay $233,000 or spend 7 years in jail for smuggling 3.4 kilograms. Then we saw in Tanzania heavy jail sentences coming down from the courts, and even in South Africa, tougher jail sentences. So maybe there's some hope that African courts will start to make this a punishable crime, because up until now, they've really made it a slap on the wrist. Finally, my last point on this goes back to a discussion, Kobus, you and I had earlier in the year about the Kenyan Wildlife Service. And we talked about how a former administrator of the Kenya Wildlife Service talked all about, he wrote, I forget what newspaper he wrote in, but he wrote basically that the amount of corruption that exists within the Kenyan Wildlife Service, KWS, was so endemic that we cannot put all the blame on China's side, that the African side is contributing to this, if not as much, significantly. Now, I don't say this to defend the Chinese in any way. My main point is that there's enough blame to go around. And at the end of the day, and this is the point that you and I have talked about endlessly on the show about when it comes to ivory, is that nobody really cares enough about the elephants to do anything that will either affect trade or public policy in any significant way. There's not enough. I don't see anybody really compromising enough to do anything. So ivory is my second. I went on a long time there. I apologize. You can see that's a passionate issue, even for me. But ivory's my second choice of the top story for 2014.
It was on my honorable mentions list as well. I mean, just in terms of more depressing kind of data, it's now, I saw today that during 2014, 1,020 rhinos were killed in South Africa alone. There weren't so many to start with, so it's a disaster. That report about the officials, smuggling ivory on Xi Jinping's official trip. I mean, that report alone was like public diplomacy being shot in the head. It's just like, it was so destructive. I think that's one of the kind of big things people will remember in China-Africa relations in 2014, which is just a disaster.
Now, there is a rumor, and I want to emphasize that this is a rumor, not fact-checked, not confirmed. But there is a rumor that a senior wildlife official from a foreign NGO who I met here in Vietnam said he just came back from Beijing. This was about 6 months ago. And he said that a big announcement from China may come at next year's FOCAC summit. That's the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit. That's a big deal. Every 5 years they get together for this. I think it's every 5 years. And this is a very big deal. And he said at the FOCAC summit they may have a big announcement on ivory policy, that there may be a change to the law. I'm not going to keep my hopes up on that, because we have not seen the normal type of ground softening for a big policy change like that. But I do say to any of our Chinese friends, particularly those who work in the foreign ministry or in the public sector in Beijing, that, you know what, if you could have a quick, easy public diplomacy win so fast, much more efficient than the $1 billion you're spending on CCTV Africa, China Daily, and all of the other media initiatives combined, if you just crack down on the ivory. I mean, it's mind-blowing what a win that would be if they really took it seriously. You know, this is a country that knows how to enforce certain laws very, very effectively. You know, the anti-pornography laws, now, granted, they may not be well enforced per se, but there are a number of laws that they really take seriously. Child porn, certainly Falun Gong, June 4th, any number of different things that are sensitive issues that they will go after like a dog on a bone. And if they just put this one in that category, boy, it would be a win worldwide.
I think the one way it could very, very possibly kind of be enforced is as part of Xi Jinping's anti-corruption drive. You know, kind of because he is really pushing that very hard. It's interesting being here and discussing that with people here, because, you know, kind of that is clearly one of the big kind of political movements within China, you know, kind of for this year. Yeah. And there's been like some stunning crackdowns on corrupt officials. So, I mean, there's a general kind of turn away from conspicuous consumption, I think, in China under Xi. And, you know, kind of, and so ivory might get targeted under that general campaign, possibly.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold your breath. I just don't see it. I don't see a demand for it. You know, people in China still, the older generation still think ivory is a, you know, protected art form, and it's something part of the culture that dates back, you know, hundreds if not thousands of years, and I just don't see it, and it's tragic. And so I really hope that in this case the United States and the European donor countries really step up with massive amounts of military support, and at the same time the legal system in Africa, across the continent, particularly in southern Africa, they just kick the crap out of people who get arrested. I mean, it's almost like, you know, here in Southeast Asia, if you're caught even with you know, a gram of heroin, it's life in prison. Maybe you get the death penalty. It's an automatic death penalty over a kilo here in Vietnam, but Southeast Asia is all the same. And I almost wish, again, I'm not an advocate of the death penalty, but a brutally tough sentence for smuggling ivory, because I don't think my 5-year-old son is going to be able to hear about a wild elephant. They may have some in the museums, but I think they're not long for this world, and I say that regrettably. Yes. What is your third and final top story of 2014?
My third story only started really emerging late this year, but I'm betting it's going to be important next year, and that is the emergence of the Silk Road as the new kind of major rhetorical trope coming from the Chinese government. So there's two new kind of parallel developments happening. The first one is something called the Silk Road Economic Belt, which is essentially a kind of a extension of Chinese economic influence through Southeast Asia and Central Asia. And that is going to include rail links, a whole lot of new nuclear power installations. And then there's also something called the Maritime Silk Road, which is essentially the extension of Chinese maritime power out into the Indian Ocean. So this is, in the first place, it's very well funded. Apparently, the Chinese government is putting in $40 billion into this, and then it has suddenly kind of like emerged as the new kind of buzzword in China. Up to a few months ago, you know, kind of the main buzzword from Xi Jinping has been the Chinese dream, as kind of in competition with the American dream. And it was when I was in China in earlier this year, there were all these Chinese dream posters up everywhere. Now there isn't one. And this conference I attended in Guangzhou took place kind of next to, on the sidelines of a major, massive conference on the Maritime Silk Road, covering China's relationship with every part of the world couched in terms of the Maritime Silk Road. And I think this is it's gonna cause a whole lot of, or create a whole lot of new issues, and it's gonna be a very, very interesting thing to watch in terms of how it affects Africa, because as China extends through the Indian Ocean, it's, kind of, there's already for a long time there's been this concept of the string of pearls bases, that China will extend its maritime power out through the Indian Ocean via a string of small maritime bases for their ships. And included in those are some African islands, including Mauritius and the Seychelles. Now, kind of, it's going to be, it's still unclear how the maritime Silk Road connects to the string of pearls concept. But what I think it makes clear is that China is very interested in extending its influence, its maritime influence westward. And the logical place for that Silk Road to end is where it ended, kind of hundreds of years ago on East Africa. So it's the natural connection between China, between Mauritius as an emerging banking center, between East Africa as emerging energy sectors, kind of all of the new gas and oil that has been discovered all down the coast of East Africa is that's the natural route for it to go back to China via this kind of maritime Silk Road. And what it then will, so sorry, just to interrupt, one last thing is, kind of the kind of wild card in all of this is India. India hasn't been happy about the expansion of Chinese maritime power to places like the Maldives and then to Mauritius, Seychelles. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they react to that.
Well, I think what it's an excellent pick for the year. There's no doubt, and it's part of, in my view, the bigger context of China reshaping the international order much more to its favor and its liking. So we talked about with Sanusha Naidu this year about the emergence of the BRICS Bank, the $50 billion BRICS Bank between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. There's the Asian Infrastructure Bank that's challenging the Asian Development Bank here in Asia. We're seeing the United States being challenged by Chinese naval power in the South China Sea. As you talked about, India in the Indian Ocean, its traditional sphere of influence is now seeing Chinese subs and Chinese naval frigates being showing up off the coast. Here in Southeast Asia, we saw a showdown between Vietnam and China over oil in the South China Sea, which of course was also a challenge to the Americans. So in so many different ways, we're seeing China as the world's largest economy now, both on a GNP and on a PPP status, a purchasing power parity status, now emerged and saying we want to shape the international economic order more to our favor. So the Silk Road is absolutely a part of that. Finally, you and I talked about with Sanusha the speech given by Xi Jinping about this great power diplomacy. Although he didn't mention Africa specifically, we know just from all of the other rhetoric that's come out of the Chinese government over the past year or 2 years on this, that Africa will be directly impacted by this new great power diplomacy.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the other very interesting kind of interesting change from the Chinese dream to the Silk Road is that, kind of the Chinese dream was always in conversation with the American dream. It was always this kind of also-ran kind of concept. And now America's essentially been eliminated, kind of rhetorically, because, kind of the Silk Road refers back to a time in the past when China was a world power, and there was no America, so it's this very interesting kind of rhetorical kind of sleight of hand where, kind of where China is kind of like recentered as this kind of like this superpower in the world. And the entire focus of the world is kind of like de-Atlantified, kind of like it's moved away from the Atlantic Ocean towards the Indian Ocean. So it's going to be super interesting to see how that develops.
That is very interesting. Okay, my final story of 2014 in our year in review, where each of us has given our 3 top stories or themes of the year in China-Africa relations. I'm going to call mine the big pushback. And I think 2014 will be remembered as the first year that African states, not a continent, forget Africa as a continent because that doesn't really exist, the AU, blah, 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 whatever. We're talking about individual African governments finding some, how's the polite way? Finding some balls, actually, just to stand up to the Chinese. So let's talk about this in terms of, I've got 3 examples here. First one is Zambia. The Ministry of Finance started revoking licenses of foreign investors who were abusing safety standards, disregarding labor laws, perpetuating a lack of transparency, and also not hiring locals. That was a really big kind of move by the finance ministry in Zambia, and it really, again, picked up on this whole pushing back narrative. The second one is Chad with the China National Petroleum Corporation, a really dramatic standoff that occurred all throughout 2014. First, the government withdrew the license of CNPC, saying it was committing horrific environmental abuses, flooding the area with oil. Then it was allowed back in to start drilling again, and finally the government pulled the license again. And finally in October, a $400 million settlement between CNPC and the Chadian government. That was very interesting. And finally in Botswana, where President Korma, I think is his name, he basically kind of said... Korma, yeah. He said he is not going to take any crap from the Chinese. And if they don't want to do business according to his standards, or not personally his standards, but to the laws and respect the laws of Botswana, well, guess what? They can go find, do business elsewhere. Okay, that's a pretty easy thing coming from Botswana, given how small it is. It's not necessarily blessed with natural resources. But it is interesting to see the rhetoric change a little bit. And you're starting to see a stronger China policy coming out of these African governments. And this is one of my favorite points. David Shambaugh, who is a longtime sinologist, and he talked about how China has an Africa policy. China now has a Zambia, a Ghana, a Sudan, a South Sudan policy, a Kenya policy. It's starting to develop much more sophisticated individual country-level bilateral policies. But most African countries don't have a China policy. They don't have sophisticated diplomats. They don't have Chinese speakers on their staffs. And yet we might start to first see the beginnings of a new